Welcome to the SharePoint Patterns and Practices webcast, and this time we're going to talk about a Docker and how to use the Docker in the SharePoint framework development. My name is Esa Juvonen. I'm a senior program manager from SharePoint Engineering, and with me today, as the person who's going to do the live demo as well, is Waldek Mastercards. So Waldek, will you do the quick intros as well?
Sure. Hi everybody, my name is Waldek Mastercards. I am Office Development MVP. I work at Rancor. And today we will talk about using Docker in SharePoint framework development.
Absolutely. And just to quickly clarify, because we don't actually have a slide around the Docker and obviously on SharePoint framework. So Docker is a virtualization technology, isn't it, Waldek? How would you put what is a Docker from an introduction perspective?
I would say that it is a really lightweight virtual machine.
Yes, that's really a great way of putting it, because obviously if we think about the classic SharePoint development, we potentially might have used VMs for isolating our stuff, and the Docker is actually enabling this kind of an isolation in a much more light way. But let's actually have a quick look on the added value of using the Docker in the SharePoint framework development. So what does it actually mean? Well, it means that you can easily isolate, or you can host multiple different versions of SharePoint framework in a single machine. So you can actually run, for example, SharePoint framework 1.0 for your one project, and 1.3 or 1.1 and 1.4 or whatever for the other projects as well. So we're able to kind of isolate these different SharePoint framework versions. But it's not just about SharePoint framework, obviously. You can also isolate different tools and configurations, meaning NPM, or if you want to test Yarn or other setups, you can absolutely isolate them inside of the Docker images as well. This is also a great tool for setting up an image or a development image for your development team. So standardizing, for example, the tools and setups, what people should be using when they're doing development to a SharePoint framework. So it is absolutely a crucial tool for the, let's say, enterprise or team development practices. And like Waldek actually already did or explained in the introduction, the Docker images are much more lightweight than a classic virtual machines. Now, this is absolutely true, but then understanding what is actually Docker and understanding how would I actually then use that if it's not a VM, and how do I log in, and how does it all works? That might be the confusing part around the Docker. But when you actually get used to the idea and the isolation, they are not actually that difficult to use, right, Waldek?
Correct, absolutely.
And basically, they absolutely provide additional value, because when you think about, let's say, if you're running a development team and you're delivering, let's say, SharePoint framework solutions for multiple customers, you obviously won't be upgrading always the latest and greatest SharePoint framework solution for all of your customers at the same time. So you need to be able to support multiple versions, and this is absolutely the key scenario where the Docker will help. Now, before we go to the actual demo, anything what I'm missing from an introduction perspective?
Well, yeah, so you touched a little on it, but maybe we can reiterate, why would you want to be able to run multiple versions of SPFX next to each other?
Yes. Well, like mentioned, absolutely. If you have multiple customer deployments and you've done, for example, a customer project back in last spring or a year ago in the spring, whatever time frame you're watching the video, you're potentially using a different SharePoint framework version and different NPM version as well. Or if you then want to use the latest and greatest or preview capabilities potentially in SharePoint framework, which we might be actually doing in the future for SharePoint framework, you want to isolate those within your development environment. So it's really around providing you that replacement for a classic VMs to do version-specific deployment. Would that be the right way of putting that?
I think so. Yes. Perfect.
Cool. So let's actually have a live demo on this one. So Waldek is going to show this one in practice. So let's jump on Waldek's desktop and then come back on the slides after that.
All right. So let's have a look how you can use the Docker images in practice in SPFX development. So the first thing that you need is actually Docker itself, right? You can get it from docker.com. And that just an installer you have to run. There is installer for Windows, for Mac, for Linux. So no matter where you run, you can get the tool, right? I have it already installed, so let me run it. And then you will see a little whale image animating. Let's not update now. Animating, and once it is done, it will stop, and then we will be able to use Docker images and all features that it offers. It's starting any moment now. That should not take long. Working on it. There you go.
It always takes longer than when you're doing a demo. So
Exactly. Right. So imagine you run it first time. So you have Docker installed, but you don't have any images. And in this image, think of it as a template from which you want to run a VM, right? So images are templates, containers are instances of these images, right? So you can have one image and you can run 5 instances of it, which is 5 containers ran off a single image. Originally, when you start, you don't have any images, right? And there are 2 ways in which you can get them. So if I would go to command line, and this works exactly the same on Mac, Windows, and Linux. So even though I'm doing a demo on the Mac, you will be able to use exactly the same commands on Windows, right? So there is no thing Mac specific to it. So first thing that you can do is to check which images you already have on your OS. So for that, you would run Docker images, and that will list all the images that you've already have. Well, if you run it initially,
quick, can you increase the font because
sorry.
I'm getting old and I can't see that small.
Like that? Better?
Yep, much better.
Okay. So with that, you will be able to see the list of all images that you have, right? And if you run it initially, the list will be empty, obviously. But in my case, you can see that I already have a few images. Imagine that you wanted to run it first time, right? And you don't have anything. What you can do is you can go to hub.docker.com. And hub is actually the place where people can publish their images to. Think of it as equivalent of npm.js, but then in the Docker world. And in here, you can search for images that somebody else, like me, already put there. So here we would search for SPFX. And here you see a number of hits, and if you grab the first one, you will get to the page where you can see all info about the image that I put together for SPFX. And you can either use this one, or you can build image by yourself. Building an image is not complex. It's something that you can do relatively easily, but it's out of scope for this webcast. We can record another one about that, but for now we will just run the image that I put together. If you go to tags, you can see the different versions of image that I put together. Why? Because each image is tied to a different version of SPFX. Right, so here you can see version 1.4.1, 1.4.0, and so forth and so on, going all the way back to release to a release. Right, so when you run an image, when you pull image down, you have to tell the Docker Hub which version of that image, which tag you actually want to use. Right. If you don't specify a tag, you will get the latest image. So, which is always the latest, which I map to the latest version of SPFX available at the time, which currently is 1.4.1. If we switch back to the first step, the repo info, here I even included a command that you can copy paste and run it, and the whole image will run. And there is a little difference regarding the name of the image, right? So if you are on a Mac OS, you will get first one. If you are on Windows, you will grab another one. I'm on a Mac, so let me just grab this one. And
before you
run it,
before you go there, there's a one step before that marker, CD your project. What does that mean?
Yes, so you want to use Docker image to either create a project or work on a project.
Yep.
A project is stored on your host disk, right? It's stored not inside a Docker container. It's also not stored inside image because that image is my template. My template does not contain your project. Your project is on your disk. So the way it works is that when you run container, you map a location on your hard disk on your host to Docker. So with that way, you map basically a local drive to Docker container, so that container and all tools that are in it have access to that location on your disk. Docker images don't have by default access to your whole disk. They can only access whatever locations from your hard drive you share specifically with that container.
So just to simplify basically what you're saying, and you clarified the whole longer run of the story, but to get started, obviously you need to create a folder where you locally will store the solution, which then could be potentially put on the VSTO or VSO, whatever.
Correct.
That's coming from your local machine.
Yes.
And then you basically say for Docker that, hey, Docker, here's my solution. Run this solution inside of your VM, so to say.
Correct. Right. So here I am on my host. I am in the tnp/pnp-spfx docker demo directory. If I can open that, you can see that it is empty. And this is the place on my host disk where I'm going to start a project. So in here, let me paste a command. And before we run it, let's walk through the bits and pieces, because it seems really long, intimidating, but it's not. It's really simple, right? So the first part is you say docker run, meaning run container or run container from the image. That basically says start. -it means interactive. So it means that you want to have a command prompt with which you want to interact with that container. Because in this case, we want to be able to run Yeoman, to run Gulp, and all these tools are inside containers. So we need to have a command prompt that we can run against that container, not against our host, because our host doesn't have anything on it, right? It doesn't even have Node, might not have Node, right? So all your tools are stored inside container, which is basically a VM. So you need a command prompt to that VM. So that's the IT part. Next, we see the --rm. And that part is specific to Docker, because when you start on container and then stop it, Docker will not remove it. Because it thinks like, well, imagine that your app would run inside of it and it broke and you want to debug it. So it gives you the ability to afterwards be able to open that container. But in our case, our files are stored on our disk on the host. So there is no need for us to retain container after it is stopped. So with that, we say, after I close the command prompt from container, remove container. So don't store it. Keep the image, the blueprint, the template, but remove container. That make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Next, we give it a name so that when we run containers, we can tell the one from another. So for that, we use the -- name switch. Then we say -v, and we specify this and that part. And this is the important part, because with this part, we map our directory from the host to a location inside the container, so that we can run Yeoman and Gulp and npm install on the same folder where files are. Our files are stored on the host, but we want to be able to use the tools from Docker on that location. So we map the two locations to one. And $pwd is a bash equivalent of current directory. So if you would run this command on Windows, you would say the whole command, the whole path. In bash, you can just say $pwd, and that will map the current directory in which I am now to this local path inside Docker. And this path will be exactly the same for me, for you, for everybody who uses this image that I've built.
And now, and that's because you define that path within your Docker image to be the location, and then
correct.
And then
Correct.
obviously this is the part which is different between a Mac and Windows, like you said, and that's why there's the two different lines in your documentation.
Correct.
So cool.
Correct.
What about the ports? Ports.
Yeah. So these are the ports. If you used SPFX in the past, you might have seen that, like the workbench, that's exposed on port 4321. Right? And there's also an API exposed on 5432. And there's also another thing that is exposed on 35729, which is doing the auto refresh of Workbench whenever you change a file in project. So all these ports, you want to expose them from inside your container where the tools run actually to your host. So that in browser on your host, because in Docker doesn't have a GUI. You cannot log into a Docker image because there is nothing to it, right? So what you will do is you will start container. It will run, but you will use the browser on your host to actually go to localhost 4321, and you will be able to open the workbench, right? So but to be able to do that, you have to map the port from container to a port on your host. And then finally, at the end, you specify the name of the image that you want to run. In our case, let's run explicitly the 1.4.1. Again, if you don't specify a tag, you will use the latest one, which might be different over time, right? So ideally, always include here a tag name, in my case, being the version of SPFX for which I have image. Right, so in this case, 1.4.1. Okay, so we run it, and it's already on. No way that you would run a regular VM so fast.
True.
Right? And my image already runs, right?
Yeah, and the fact that you don't actually have any operating system stuff to maintain, which is
well, there is a Linux image, but
Sure.
you can really easily update it, right? So there is no, yeah. All right, so in here, the first step that we do is we create a new project. So for that, we run just as we would do otherwise, Microsoft SharePoint. And first time it's going to ask us if we want to improve Yeoman. No, we don't. And now we just go through the regular process of creating new projects. So SPFX, SharePoint Online, current folder, yes, deploy to all sites, web part, hello world. No JavaScript framework, and we create it. And that's just a regular Yeoman flow. There is nothing specific to it, to the fact that it runs in Docker. Actually, another thing that I could have done is to create, maybe I can just do that here. Let me open a new tab quickly to show you actually that the files are being actually created. What was it called? It was called PnP, yeah. So here we can see that we get files created on our host. I am now on my host. I am here inside Docker. So this I could even open in Explorer. And I cannot because the window is shared. There we go. There it is. Right, so here you can see the files that are created now on my host. And that I can just use as any other folder and file on my disk. Right,
and again,
so even
just
though
to reiterate that, and these files are then executed in the context of the Docker file. So the only thing what you need to do now, this is obviously absolutely brilliant because now you can then have a multiple Docker files with the different setups, and the Docker file can have different npm versions and SPFX versions and all of that.
And Node, and you can use Yarn and PnP and all of that. Yeah, so.
And you can go to another folder and just spin up another Docker running and then do the yo there at the same time as this is running. All works perfectly fine. So basically what you're saying is that the only thing what you need to do is to go and copy the line from your from the Docker hub. And now when we're recording this one, we do not have an official SPFX Docker from Microsoft side, and we're looking into doing that obviously in the future now. But for now, and the process will be pretty much exactly the same what you're seeing within this video as well. But if that's the only thing to do, and you're able to actually have multiple different, let's say, environment setups, that's absolutely brilliant.
Yep.
And like mentioned on the advantages of this one, absolutely great for team development, and the experience is exactly the same in Windows and in Mac and in Linux, so it doesn't really change the Docker experience is exactly the same. Cool. There's no point probably waiting for this one to get finalized, or how do we? What were you thinking?
Well, so I guess that's the time when we pull a chicken, like, there you go, there's one ready.
Yes. Here's a web part, woohoo! Maybe we'll actually have to, we can speed up the video until the Docker, the Yeoman is completed, and then let's double check that everything is working properly. So let's speed up.
Yep. All right, the project is done.
That was so fast, wasn't it?
Yeah, and actually, to give you another proof that this is not going, that this command prompt works inside a VM, let me try to run code, VS Code. So here I would type code dot, and it's not going to work. Why? Because now I am inside a Docker container that doesn't have VS Code. So for that, I would switch to another prompt, which is on my host, and in here I can run code. And here I will get window in which I can work with the code. So all of that is here. I have node modules, typings, and all of that is going to work. But actually, the code is going to run inside container, right? So I cannot run code in here, but I can run code in here because code is on my host. It's not inside Docker.
And we're talking about Visual Studio Code, just not the code.
Correct.
So
yes.
Being super clear on that. Yeah.
Yes. So I guess that the only part left, we have to run it and to actually see it in browser, right?
Yep.
All right. So in here, let's run gulfserve. And if you would run it on your host, what it will do is it would build and bundle the project, and it would start a browser, right? And again, because this command runs inside a VM, if you will, it cannot start the browser because the browser is on your host, not in a VM, right? So you will have to start the browser by yourself, but that's the only step, right? This is the only step. So project is almost done building and packaging. 3 to 1, yeah, so we are done here. Now we can switch to browser, and here we can say HTTPS localhost 4321 temp-port, which is that regular SharePoint framework URL that you would use on your host as well. And in here you will get the alert because the cert is again inside Docker and not on my host. So that's all fine. We can skip that, and in here we can say hello world. We would be able to say that. Something's wrong. We can debug that. What's wrong? I can imagine that it has to do with the fact that the API is exposed on port 5432, and that's not trusted yet. We will have exactly the same thing. Cannot get. What's wrong with that? There you go. Right. So even though it says there, it doesn't. It could be that it needs some time to run still.
Yeah.
Right. Either way. Still, we have the web part here. We can add it to the page, and it's there. And now let's switch to Visual Studio Code. Do a little change. Welcome to SharePoint in Docker. Save it. Switch to our command line. That's rebuilding. Rebuilding.
And it's refreshing as well. So
by itself. So you even get the auto refresh, even though the thing that monitors the file that it changed runs inside a VM.
Yeah.
Right? So all of that works just fine. Anything else you want to add or ask?
And obviously this works with the online workbench as well, so no problems with that. It will be actually easier that way, right? Because
yeah, sure.
Then there's no trusting issues on the local host. Cool. I think that's it for the getting started demo on this one. So let's actually flip back on the slides and close up the webcast. And thank you, Waldek, for the great demo as well. And like we mentioned on the demo side, so even though Waldek is using a Mac, which isn't actually bad thing at all, because obviously you can use whatever operating system.
Why do you laugh? Why do you laugh?
It's like, how would I put it in a way that nobody's getting? No, that's fine. That's fine. So SharePoint framework development can be done in any platform, which is really, really, really the key. And in my case, I'm using a Windows, but just as well I could be using a Mac, so it really doesn't matter. And the key point here is to understand it's like we mentioned during the demo as well. The model is almost the same. Well, I would say precisely the same in any operating system where you're using a Docker. And really the advantages is the isolation, and the Docker is the lightweight, much more lightweight than a classic VM to isolate the development experience. What else are we missing from a summary perspective?
Well, the one thing that I would add is I would encourage everybody to give it a try. It is a new piece of tech that you might have not used yet. And while it is new, it really replaces the old VMs that we used to use in the past, where you would carry around external disks with VMs of 100 gigs plus, with the full OS and updates and all that. Yeah. Docker image is under a gig, a few hundred megs, and there are some bits and pieces to it too that make it even less. But the most important part is once you learn the basics, and it won't take you more than a day, to be honest.
Yeah.
And once you learn that, you will get a big benefit because it will make you more efficient in your work. So I would definitely encourage you to give it a try. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you miss any content intro. If you have any questions, feedback, do reach out.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to further reiterate your reiteration as well. So if you think about the classic SharePoint development, we definitely, this is a model which we used to do in my customer engagements as well. So we created a standardized VM for farm solution, potentially for add-in solution. You could do that for SharePoint framework solution, but then you need to maintain that VM. And that is absolutely taking a lot of time, and all of that is gone if you're using it to Docker. So that is absolutely a clear benefit for your DevOps operations. DevOps operations. So no, Dev operations.
Dev operations.
That's the right way of putting it. Anyway, thank you, Wallach, for the great demo. Thank you for people for watching, and we'll come back with a new webcast sooner or later. Thank you.
Bye.